make a reasonable or a likelihood ratio as to which individual contributed to that bloodstain?
I did the comparisons to the 3 individuals. The DNA results are at least 1.59 times 10 to the 25th, or 15.9 septillion times more likely if they originated from Mr. Thomas, Christopher Thomas, than if they originated from one unrelated, unknown individual.
Were you able
Mr. Henry and Mr. Williams were excluded as contributors.
That's my next question. So with regards to item number 25, were you able to conduct a DNA analysis of that item?
I did.
What was that item identified to you as?
Swab, bloodstain, G12, Air Jordan, sneaker E.
Were you able to come to a conclusion as to the source of that bloodstain?
I obtained a DNA profile and interpreted as originating from a single male contributor. Mr. Williams, or all 3 individuals were compared in comparison to Mr. Anthony Williams. The results are at least 5.3 times 10 to the 25th, or 53 septillion, times more likely if they originated from Anthony Williams than if they originated from one unrelated, unknown individual. Mr. Henry and Mr. Thomas were excluded as contributors.
So I want to move on to the next report that you did. In terms of the crime lab and how it works, when evidence is
Join large-scale battles with military vehicles. The online action game War Thunder has received a major update. Direct Hit. Joining the battle are machines.
We want the investigators to provide the most probative evidence for their investigation first, and then move on after that. With the cases of maybe a non-suspect burglary case, you may only get 2 evidence items worth.
in terms of limits on homicide cases, is there any limit to the number of items that can be worked?
There's no limit as far as I know. Again, it's worked in series of samples so that 100 or 150 items aren't submitted all at once. Again, to try and have the investigator determine which would be the most probative evidence for the investigation.
And in terms of your role in that process, do you know the underlying facts of the investigation as it's progressing?
Sometimes yes, but mostly no. I'm typically just assigned the case. There may be some communications between the unit supervisor and the investigator as to why more evidence is being submitted or reasons why the investigator is requesting more evidence.
Okay. In front of you, there's a stack of items that have already been admitted into evidence. If I may approach, Your Honor.
Yes.
We've talked about a few already here. Do you recognize the green sticker on this item that's already been admitted as State 58?
Example?
Please.
Yes.
And how do you recognize that?
On the back, it has my laboratory number, my initials, and all the item numbers as they were submitted to the laboratory.
And do you then assign the individual numbers that we talked about?
Yes, the numbers are assigned based off of our record-keeping system. They're a sequential number, so the first item gets number 1, and then sequentially down the line.
Okay. Moving on to what's been placed into evidence as State 53. Again, do you recognize that item?
I do. Again, it has my laboratory number, my initials, and my item numbers marked on it.
What's been previously admitted into evidence as State 33. Do you recognize that item?
I do. Again, it has all my markings on it.
Okay. As to what has been admitted as State 46.
Yes, again, the items are marked and my limitations are on the evidence.
Okay. And as to item states 32, did you ever get this one?
I don't think so.
So the answer is no.
No, I do not, because my markings are not on here.
Okay. As to what's been admitted as state 26, have you reviewed that item?
Yes, I have.
Is that
I've
okay?
marked it and with my laboratory item numbers and my initials.
So I'm approaching with what's been previously marked as state GG for identification purposes only. Okay, I'm showing you what's been previously marked as state GG for identification purposes only. Do you recognize that item? Please. It is open.
Yeah. Yes, it has my markings on it, case number, item numbers, initials.
Did you analyze the items inside of that package?
Yes, I did.
Okay. Hold on just a moment. So showing defense counsel, it's been marked as state triple T. Sorry. Showing you what's been marked as state triple T for identification purposes only. Do you recognize that item?
I do. It again has my information marked on the outside.
And did you collect that item?
No, I did not.
Is that an item that you analyzed?
Yes.
Okay, we'll come back to that. Thank you so much. So all of the items that we're looking at here, Mr. Rose, are packaged in paper bags.
Or manila envelopes, yes.
Why is that?
The investigators use these types of evidence packaging in case the evidence is wet. It helps to allow air to get through the package to dry it. One of the things that will cause issues, degradation, is essentially having a biological stain remain wet, and mold, mildew, and bacteria will grow on it and potentially destroy any DNA that's present.
Is it important to keep DNA in a dry environment for preserving it?
Yes.
Is there limits on the temperature range in which the DNA is kept at the evidence vault?
There's no limits. The evidence vaults in laboratories are around 60 degrees, maybe 65. We do have freezers that we have old cases. So as long as the evidence is kept cool and dry, and being frozen is cool and dry, the DNA will persist for decades.
In terms of if the DNA is heated, would that cause degradation to it?
Yes, heat, moisture, and sunlight are three of the main factors that will cause degradation and essentially destruction of the DNA present.
So why don't they just keep it in plastic bags?
The plastic won't allow any air to get through to the evidence, and it will basically cause condensation if it's moist. If the evidence is moist or wet, which will then lead to the mold, mildew, and bacteria growing.
Can one person's DNA change to become someone else's?
No.
How does it not? Does air bring other DNA into those bags and samples?
No.
So going back now on to item number 26 that you processed. What was that identified as to you?
Swab from Yellow Jacket.
And there's another number that you list in your notes and reports of an 81. Where is that number coming from?
The first number, 26, is the item number that is generated in the laboratory when I am doing inventory in my inventory system. The 81 is the agency number as it's submitted on the prior receipt.
Okay. So going on to item number 26, did you analyze the swab of the Yellow Jacket as it's described?
I did, yes.
And what were your conclusions on that particular item?
The results were interpreted as a mixture originating from 4 contributors.
So were you able to make determinations as to the standards that you had?
I did, yes.
Okay, we could discuss first with regards to Anthony Williams. What conclusion did you reach and what statistical basis for that?
He was included as a contributor to the mixture in the likelihood calculation. The results are at least 2.05 times 10 to the 8th, or 205 million. Times more likely if these DNA results originated from Anthony Williams and 3 unrelated unknown individuals than if they originated from 4 unrelated unknown individuals.
In terms of a 4-person mixture, do you expect the statistics to be a little bit lower, just based on that?
It depends on, again, when I was speaking of contribution, if a person is more represented in a sample, the statistics or likelihood calculation can be rather large. It just depends on how much contribution is in that mixture.
Were you able to exclude anybody from the swab of the yellow jacket, item 26?
Christopher Thomas and Cortland Henry were excluded.
In terms of item number 27, how was that item number 27, how was that number identified to you?
Swab from Gatorade bottle.
Were you able to analyze that and develop DNA profiles?
I obtained a single source profile indicating male origin.
Were you able to determine the single source origin of that profile?
Christopher Thomas was included. The likelihood calculation is as follows. The DNA results are at least 1.65 times 10 to the 25th, or 16.5 septillion. Times more likely if they originated from Mr. Thomas than if they originated from 1 unrelated unknown individual.
Okay. Going on to item number 28, did you do the same?
I did.
And what was that listed as?
Swab from Gatorade bottle.
And that swab, who were you able to determine, or what DNA conclusions were you able to make?
The DNA results were interpreted as originated from a single male contributor. Mr. Anthony Williams was included. The likelihood calculation, the DNA results are at least 4.38 times 10 to the 25th, or 43.8 septillion times more likely if they originated from Anthony Williams than if they originated from 1 unrelated unknown individual.
At this point in everything that we have talked about, were you provided a standard for the defendant, Jamel Devins?
No.
So going on to item number 29, were you able to develop a DNA profile on that particular item?
I analyzed the results and deemed it to be uninterpretable due to limited data.
And what was item number 29?
It's listed as swab from bloodstain on rear passenger seat, PM number 1.
And you couldn't say where that was collected from.
I can.
Going on to your next report, I'm talking about the MVAC filter. Can you explain to the ladies and gentlemen of the jury what is an MVAC filter?
An MVAC filter is a filter paper where the investigator will essentially soak the surface of whatever they're looking for, maybe a shirt or a shoe or even a door, in a liquid, and they come back and they vacuum it up. And all of that vacuumed up liquid will then go and be deposited on the filter paper. That filter paper is then taken out of the apparatus, dried, and then I will take a portion of that filter paper and try and develop a DNA profile from the surface that they process.
Excuse me, I didn't hear the item number. What's that?
It's item number 31 of his report.
Thank you.
So on the MVAC filter, item 31, that you were asked to process in this case, what was your information relayed as to where that MVAC source was?
It's identified as MVAC filter 9 from spent casings found on ground at US 27 and Southwest 208th Avenue.
So we talked a little bit about things that are conducive to DNA. Does sunlight have an effect on it, you said, I believe, right?
Yes, it can.
What does sunlight do to DNA if exposed?
Again, with the heat, light, and moisture, it allows bacteria to grow and to essentially degrade the DNA.
And when you did an analysis of item number 31, the MVAC filter, what conclusions were you able to draw?
I did an extraction on the piece of evidence, and after quantitation, I determined that there was insufficient amount of extracted DNA to go forward. So I did not attempt to develop a DNA profile, and I stopped processing at that point.
And if you remind ladies and gentlemen of the jury, what does it mean if you stop it at that second step?
The extraction, meaning I would not obtain a DNA profile that could be used for any sort of comparisons. There just isn't enough genetic material in the extract.
What is the information, what are you relying on, and what training and experience to make that conclusion?
It's the quantitation results, the type of samples that I have obtained or that I analyzed. So I'm not surprised that MVACs from casings yield very little DNA.
Moving on to your next report, item 32. Was that item provided to you for DNA analysis?
It was, yes.
And that is in evidence, I believe, if I may, as states 46.
Yes.
So if I may, publish for the jury. So I'm publishing now states 46. What was states 46 purported to you to be?
These are oral swabs or standards from juvenile demons.
And with regards to item number 32 and 33 in your report, are they the same?
Item number 32 is listed as the right cheek, and 33 is listed as the left cheek.
Similar to we previously talked about, did you just pick one to test?
Correct, I did just the first one.
Is there any rhyme or reason as to picking the right versus the left?
Nope.
Going on, and so once you got this standard, did you go back and look at the other evidence you previously analyzed?
Yes, so comparisons were made to all the previously analyzed questioned evidence.
So going to item number 22, the swab from the Gucci sandals. Were you able to compare the profile from Mr. Demons as opposed to the profile developed from those sandals?
I did, and he was excluded.
The blood stain on the front of the t-shirt, item number 23, were you able to compare Mr. Demons' profile to that?
I did a comparison, and he was again excluded.
What about item number 24, the cutting on the blood stain of the rear of the t-shirt?
After comparisons were done, he was excluded.
Okay, then on item number 25, the swab of the blood stain from the Air Jordans.
Again, an exclusion.
Going on to item number 26, the swab from the yellow jacket.
An exclusion as well.
And in terms of the item number 27 and 28, the swabs of the Gatorade bottles. What were the results on that?
Those were both exclusions.
So going forward to what's been shown to you but not yet admitted into evidence for identification purposes is states triple T. What was that item told to you to be?
I'm sorry, could you repeat that?
Sure. On your item 34, what's been shown to you for identification purposes only as states triple T. What was that item described to you to be?
It's listed as a cutting of headliner.
And how did you analyze that particular piece of evidence?
That evidence, I had to do a visual examination on it and actually take a cutting of a potential blood stain.
And can you explain to ladies and gentlemen of the jury what's the difference between using it from a swab versus a cutting of an item?
This was a piece of evidence, a headliner. It was the size, maybe a foot squared. There were some small red brown stains on there. So there's oftentimes where the evidence itself is better to be submitted as opposed to moistening a cotton tip swab and then swabbing it, just in case the small blood stain becomes too diffuse on the cotton tip swab. And why that's important is I do my best to preserve evidence for future testing. So if an item of evidence is submitted, I typically process only half of the evidence. If there's only one swab submitted, I'll process half of the swab, leaving half for retesting either in current technologies by another laboratory or save it for future testing when technology has advanced even further. So
the visuals on this game blow away any competition we've seen so far. You will see some insane boss battles, some really cool heroes to collect. This is live in-game combat right here. And just the visuals, look at this. Rips the stone out the ground, slams it on your head. I was like immersed in the visual, in the gameplay. It's pretty nuts.
Are you out of the loop? If you've been suffering from failing or missing teeth and have been told your situation is hopeless and dentures are in your future, or dentures are your only option, or maybe you're already in a denture, then stay tuned and I'll let you know why you should just say no to dentures. I'm Dr. Kelly Vaughn with First Choice Dental Care and Restore in 24. In this video, I'm going to answer
Any testing on this, will you know without doing serology if something is epithelial or blood?
I would have.
In this case, the serology indicated blood. And which test did you use to determine that?
I use a phenolphthalein test.
And were any individuals excluded from that sample?
Mr. Henry, Mr. Thomas, and Mr. Devins were excluded as contributors.
So moving on to item number 40. We're getting towards the end. With regards to item number 40, was that item submitted and analysis done?
Yes.
Okay. What was item number 40? What steps of the DNA process did you take it through as well?
Item number 40 was extracted for DNA, but after quantitation, there wasn't a sufficient amount of DNA to move forward, so I did not attempt to do any DNA profiling.
And what was item number 40 described as?
A contact swab of non-blood area of rear up-driver seat.
And after, is this the same discussion we had with regards to the last item? With not enough DNA, so then you stop it at that first step?
Correct, after extraction. So after quantitation.
Why don't you at least try and take it through and go through all the steps?
Oftentimes the quantitation results in a 0, meaning none was detected. Sometimes it results in a null value, meaning not even less than 0 was obtained. So at that point, I'm pretty confident that I'm not going to obtain a DNA equivalent.
Do you do a control swab or sample as you're going through the DNA process each time?
The DNA processing has several controls during extraction. I have a reagent blank, and this is just a sample of just the reagents by themselves. The extraction reagents that I use will be processed with the samples to ensure that the reagents are free of contaminants. When I do a amplification for PCR, there will be a positive control and a negative control. The negative control is again just a tube of reagents. There shouldn't be any DNA present at the end. And the positive control is a known DNA standard. And so after I do my amplification, the negative control needs to be blank and the positive control needs to I need to generate the DNA profile from that positive control.
So let's go back. You mentioned reagents. I don't think we've defined that for the jury here today. What is a reagent?
Reagents are the chemicals that I use for my DNA processing.
Are they standard and part of the kit that you were talking about earlier?
There are different components in the amplification kit, quantitation kit. We have different reagents used for extraction. So at every step there are a set of reagents that we use.
And those are all related to the controls as well.
Correct.
So going back, so once we talked about that, let's start talking about item number 41. What was item 41 described to you as?
It's listed as blood swab of smear from rear of driver's seat.
Were you able to come to any sort of conclusion as to item 41?
I obtained some results, but I reported that they were uninterpretable due to limited data.
What does that mean?
Meaning I obtained the electrocardiogram stage, I analyzed the ending result of that PCR amplification and deemed that there wasn't sufficient amount of DNA to make any comparisons.
Okay, so I'm going to move on to item number 66. Did you analyze that particular item? And in terms of what was item number 66?
Item number 66 was initially reported as contact swab of rear of driver's side door handle interior.
Were you able to determine what the packaging of item number 66 said?
Yes, the contact swab of rear of driver's side door handle interior.
I'm sorry, on number 66 is which?
Front of driver's side door handle.
So you can't specify as to which it came from.
I'm not sure of the question.
You didn't collect this item of evidence.
No, I didn't.
So after reviewing the item analysis, did you amend your report to read contact swab of front driver's side door handle interior?
That's true.
So going on to item number 42, which is been labeled as item 66 by the Miramar Police Department. What results did you have?
Again, I obtained a DNA profile, but ruled it or determined it to be uninterpretable due to limited data.
Does uninterpretable mean no DNA?
In this case, no, there was DNA present, but it was insufficient amount to make any sort of determination, number of contributors or even comparisons.
Are you still looking back at those same standards that we've talked about previously?
The interpretation of the question samples is done prior to looking at the interpretation of the notes.
Why is that?
It's to avoid any sort of bias. I want to make my interpretation calls of those unknowns absent of knowing what the known standards are.
Does the computer do any of this analysis or say, hey, it's person A or person B for you?
No, it does not.
So moving on to item number 43. Is that the last item you tested in this case?
Yes.
So with regards to what was item number 43 listed as?
Swab, rear driver's side door, handle interior.
Were you able to do DNA testing on that particular item?
I did. Yes.
Did you develop a profile?
I did.
And can you explain what DNA profile you developed?
In this particular case, I reported out both a 2-person mixture and a 3-person mixture.
And so explain why you would report out 2 different hypotheses.
When I did the initial interpretation of the question sample of this item 43, there was the appearance of a 2-person mixture. After doing a comparison to known standards and doing the likelihood calculation, the result was essentially unintuitive. There was a lot of contribution being attributed to an individual, but then resulted in an exclusionary likelihood ratio.
So can you explain what that means in a little bit simpler math terms, if possible?
Yeah, essentially the likelihood ratio resulted in exclusion. So after talking with my technical leader, I determined, or we both came to the consensus that it would be best to report out or then interpret it as a 3-person mixture and then report out both results.
So with regards to when you're saying it's an exclusion, is there a certain number of loci that it has to not match for you to report it as an exclusion?
When it comes to likelihood ratios, as I had mentioned before, it's doing it's comparing two hypotheses, essentially that a person is included versus a person, an unrelated unknown individual is included. And it does this at every specific location. So going through all of those locations, there's the potential to have 16, 17, 18 locus-specific likelihood ratios. And at the end of it, those are all multiplied together to get the final result. So if one specific location results in a 0 likelihood ratio, but everything else is inclusionary, it's an indication that there's an issue with how the software was set up. And so as an analyst, I would go back and see what the issue was and then rerun this deconvolution and redo the calculations. In this particular case, after doing a visual comparison of the standards to the mixture and then looking at the resulting likelihood ratios, again, I spoke with the technical leader and we determined that there will be best to report out both.
So I'm going to go starting with the alternative proposition on that. Were you able to exclude anyone in the alternative proposition that you put forth?
Mr. Cortland Henry was excluded.
With regards to the initial proposition,
Cortland Henry, Anthony Williams, and Jamel Dimmons were excluded.
who was included on the initial proposition?
Christopher Thomas was included.
When you were looking at it as 2 contributors, how did you exclude the defendant, in this case, Mr. Dimmons?
How did I exclude him? Is that-
Yes.
So again, after doing the visual comparison and then running it through to generate the likelihood ratio, it resulted in an exclusionary likelihood ratio.
When you looked at it again as a 3-person mixture, were you able to make a determination as to whether or not Christopher Thomas was included as a source of that mixture?
Yeah, he was included as a 3-person as well.
And what were the statistics on the 3-person mixture for Christopher Thomas?
The results are at least 8.15 times 10 to the 24th, or 8.15 septillion times more likely if they originated from Christopher Thomas and 2 unrelated unknown individuals than if they originated from 3 unrelated unknown individuals.
In terms of as to Cortland Henry, were you able to do the statistical calculations as to whether or not he was excluded on a 3-person mixture on item number 43, swab of rear driver's side door handle interior?
Yes, the results are at most 46, and this is an inverse LR calculation because the number was less than 1. So the DNA results are at most 46 times more likely if it originated from 3 unrelated unknown individuals than if it originated from Cortland Henry and 2 unrelated unknown individuals.
So is your conclusion that Mr. Henry is excluded from that sample?
Yes.
Okay. Going on to Anthony Williams, were you able to make a conclusion as to whether or not he was included or excluded?
I did. He was included. The LR calculation, the DNA results are at least 41.2 times more likely if they originated from Anthony Williams and 2 unrelated unknown individuals, than if they originated from 3 unrelated unknown individuals.
And in terms of the verbal qualifier that you would give for Mr. Williams being included in that sample, what verbal qualifier would you give?
Limited support for inclusion.
Is that the lowest for inclusion?
Yes.
Okay. I believe I forgot to ask you with Christopher Thomas, what verbal qualifier would you give if he is included on that?
It is the highest at very strong support.
And at last but not least, were you able to analyze the profile of the defendant Jamel Demons in this case?
I did this.
And what was your conclusion in a 3-person mixture as to the results of Mr. Demons being included or excluded?
He was included. The likelihood calculation, the DNA results are at least 2.12 times 10 to the 8th, or 212 million times more likely if they originated from Jamel Demons and 2 unrelated unknown individuals than if they originated from 3 unrelated unknown individuals.
And what verbal qualifier did you give to that particular item of
Very-
Mr. Demons being included?
There is very strong support for the inclusion.
Nothing further at this time, Your Honor.
May I?
You ready? You may proceed. Alvin? Sure. We'll take a short recess. Do not discuss the case. Don't form any opinion about the case. Don't allow anyone to discuss the case in the presence. Serving no research. Just leave your notepads on the chair.
Tornado Spin Mop. High-speed wringer and extra-large microfiber head removes excess water for a fast clean. Fill it, spin it, and mop it like it's hot. Learn more at Libman.com.
You let the order reflect the jury stepped out. Counsel may no longer defend. Mr. Demons, in your restroom break?
Yes, sir.
Yes, can you arrange that?
Yes, sir.
Thank you. We're on recess.
Hey, welcome back to Law and Crime. So how does this happen? How do these guys that are working so closely together in the rap industry in South Florida, how does this unfold one night in October of 2018? They're all in a car. Maybe the defendant, Jamel Demons, is in that car. Maybe he's not. But somehow, in the end of the night, 2 of his buddies, Anthony Williams, a.k.a. Sack Chaser, and Christopher Thomas Jr., a.k.a. Juvie, they're dead. They're literally taken to the hospital a little after 4 in the morning. They left the studio about 2:17. How did all this unfold and what happened? The prosecution says that Demons did it, period. We haven't heard a great story about motive. We know you don't need one. Maybe there was some money issue, licensing. We've heard a little testimony on that maybe Demons wanted all of that money for himself, so he kind of cut out some of the middlemen. And that's about all we know at this point. So we are in the middle of the prosecution's case, and we are hearing DNA testimony that we expect is going to more clearly link these parties and where they were that night. Remember, there's a question as to who was in the car. Were the shots fired from within the car, or were they, as Demons suggests, the victim of a drive-by that night? So all these questions still up in the air, and the prosecution doing their best to get them answered. Right now, Kurt Rhodes on the stands. He's the DNA dude, and he's trying to help this jury understand what happened that night when these 2 men died. Let's go back into the courtroom.
What is that described as? I'm sorry, 24. We just finished 23. Item 24. What is that described as?
The cutting blood stain on rear of T-shirt drew Philomedic CG10.
Did you do a DNA analysis on item number 24?
I did. It was interpreted as originating from a single male contributor.
And were you able to make a reasonable or a likelihood ratio as to which individual contributed to that blood stain?
I did the comparisons to the 3 individuals. The DNA results are at least 1.59 times 10 to the 25th, or 15.9 septillion times more likely if they originated from Mr. Thomas, Christopher Thomas, than if they originated from one unrelated, unknown individual.
Were you able
Mr. Henry and Mr. Williams were excluded as contributors.
My next question. So with regards to item number 25, were you able to conduct a DNA analysis of that item?
I did.
What was that item identified to you as?
Swab, bloodstain, G12, Air Jordan, sneaker E.
Were you able to come to a conclusion as to the source of that bloodstain?
I obtained a DNA profile and interpreted as originating from a single male contributor. Mr. Williams, where all 3 individuals were compared, in comparison to Mr. Anthony Williams. The results are at least 5.3 times 10 to the 25th, or 53 septillion, times more likely if they originated from Anthony Williams than if they originated from one unrelated, unknown individual. Mr. Henry and Mr. Thomas were excluded as contributors.
So I want to move on to the next report that you did. In terms of the crime lab and how it works, when evidence is submitted to the lab, is it submitted in batches from the investigative agencies?
When evidence is submitted, we have a submission policy. So based off of the type of incident that's being investigated, there's essentially a number of items that can be submitted. In the cases of homicides, there are typically 10 to 12 items per testing round, is what we call it. We want the investigators to provide the most probative value, the most probative evidence for their investigation first, and then move on after that. With the cases of maybe a non-suspect burglary case.
Of items that can be worked?
There's no limit as far as I know. Again, it's worked in a series of samples so that 100 or 150 items aren't submitted all at once. Again, to try and have the investigator determine which would be the most probative evidence for the investigation.
And in terms of your role in that process, do you know the underlying facts of the investigation as it's progressing?
Sometimes yes, but mostly no. I'm typically just assigned the case. There may be some communications between the unit supervisor and the investigator as to why more evidence is being submitted or reasons why the investigator is requesting more evidence.
Okay. In front of you, there's a stack of items that have already been admitted into evidence. If I may approach, Hunter.
Yes.
We've talked about a few already here. Do you recognize the green sticker on this item that's already been admitted as State 58? Please.
Yes.
And how do you recognize that?
On the back, it has my laboratory number, my initials, and all the item numbers as they were submitted to the laboratory.
And do you then assign the individual numbers that we talked about?
Yes, the numbers are assigned based off of our record-keeping system. They're a sequential number, so the first item gets number 1, and then sequentially down the line.
Okay. Moving on to what's been placed into evidence as State 53. Again, do you recognize that item?
I do. Again, it has my laboratory number, my initials, and my item numbers marked on it.
What's been previously admitted into evidence as State 33. Do you recognize that item?
I do. Again, it has all my markings on it.
Okay. as to what has been admitted as State 46.
Yes, again, the items are marked and my limitations on the evidence.
Okay. And as to item State 32, did you ever get this one?
Because my markings are not on here.
Okay. As to what's been admitted as State 26, have you reviewed that item?
Yes, I have.
Is that
I've
right?
marked it and put my laboratory item numbers and my initials.
So I'm approaching with what's been previously marked as State GG for identification purposes only. Okay, I'm showing you what's been previously marked as State GG for identification purposes only. Do you recognize that item? Please. It is open.
Yeah. Yes, it has my markings on it, case number, item numbers, initials.
Did you analyze the items inside of that package?
Yes, I did.
Okay. Hold on just a moment. So showing defense counsel, it's been marked as State triple T. Sorry. Showing you what's been marked as State triple T for identification purposes only. Do you recognize that item?
I do. It again has my information marked on the outside.
And did you collect that item?
No, I did not collect it.
Is that an item that you analyzed?
Yes.
Okay, and we'll come back to that. Thank you so much. So all of the items that we're looking at here, Mr. Rhodes, are packaged in paper bags.
Or manila envelopes, yes.
Why is that?
The investigators use these types of evidence packaging in case the evidence is wet. It helps to allow air to get through the package to dry it. One of the things that will cause issues, degradation, is essentially having a biological stain remain wet, and mold, mildew, and bacteria will grow on it and potentially destroy any DNA present.
Is it important to keep DNA in a dry environment for preserving it?
Yes.
Is there limits on the temperature range in which the DNA is kept at the evidence vault?
There's no limits. The evidence vaults in laboratories are about 60 degrees, maybe 65. We do have freezers that we have old cases. So as long as the evidence is kept cool and dry, and being frozen is cool and dry, the DNA will persist for decades.
In terms of if the DNA is heated, would that cause degradation to it?
Yes, heat, moisture, and sunlight are three of the main factors that will cause degradation and essentially destruction of the DNA present.
So why don't they just keep it in plastic bags?
The plastic won't allow any air to get through to the evidence, and it will basically cause condensation if it's moist. If the evidence is moist or wet, which will then lead to the mold, mildew, and bacteria growing.
Can one person's DNA change to become someone else's?
No.
How does it not? Does air bring other DNA into those bags and samples?
No.
So going back now on to item number 26 that you processed. What was that identified as to you?
Swab from Yellow Jacket.
And there's another number that you list in your notes and reports of an 81. Where is that number coming from?
The first number, 26, is the item number that is generated in the laboratory when I am doing inventory in my inventory system. The 81 is the agency number as it's submitted on the prior receipt.
Okay. So going on to item number 26, did you analyze the swab of the Yellow Jacket as it's described?
I did, yes.
And what were your conclusions on that particular item?
The results were interpreted as a mixture originating from 4 contributors.
So were you able to make determinations as
Jury entry.
Ladies and gentlemen, thank you. Please be seated. Let the record once again reflect the presence of the defendants, veterans, his counsel, and assistant state attorneys. So, ladies and gentlemen, the jury.
Thank you, Your Honor. I'm going to say good evening to you.
Yes, good
Because I feel like it's nighttime. By any chance, do you know George Bellow?
He is the unit supervisor for the firearms section.
Yeah. He gave us an education on firearms, and you've now given us an education on DNA. So he said he would give us some type of certificate. So I expect you also to get some type of certificate on DNA. But in any event, when did you perform your first DNA testing? The date, please.
May I purge my notes?
Absolutely. Feel free at any time.
My initial examination of the first evidence was on January 23 of 2019.
2019.
Correct.
And that's when you analyzed or examined various items that came out of a grade G. That was water bottle, some sneakers, I think, a yellow jacket, a Gatorade bottle, item 27, I think you identified.
For this particular date, it was items 16 through 25.
16 through 25, okay. On 123 of 19, you examined a water bottle, a spent casing, Gucci sandals, and a blood stain on front of a t-shirt and a blood stain on the rear of the t-shirt. And also a blood stain on an Air Jordan sneaker, correct?
That's correct.
That turned out not to come back to this young man right over here, correct? Mr. Demons. I'm going to call him Jamel. It's easier. Okay. Isn't that correct?
At this time or later?
Later.
Later. May I refer to my report?
Absolutely. And give us a date that you did that.
Absolutely.
Please.
So on January 25th of 2022 is when the comparisons were made to Mr. Devins, and he was excluded from all those items.
That was January of what?
The report was issued on January 25th of 2022.
I'm sorry.
I did my analysis on January 24th, the day before. I did not.
Then you analyzed, did you not, item 26, a yellow jacket, a Gatorade bottle, correct?
Yes, that's right.
And what date did you examine those items?
That was on August 24th of 2021.
August 24th, you said?
Correct.
Of 21. That was 2 years approximately after he was arrested. Did you know that?
I did not.
And those came from inside the Jeep. Did you know that?
I did not.
And those did not match Jamel, correct?
That's correct. He was excluded.
Then you received some additional items, correct?
Yes, that's correct.
What was the date that you received the additional items?
They were received on multiple days. I began processing the impact filter on January 5th of 2022.
That was approximately 3 years after his arrest.
The cutting of the headliner, which is item 34,
When did you receive that?
was I processed or began processing on January 28th of 2022.
Also about 3 years after his arrest.
Objection, counsel's testifying.
I thought it was a question. Restate it. Sustain. Restate your
Did
question.
you know it was approximately 3 years after he was arrested?
I did not. Excuse me, 40, 41, and 42. Those were processed on April 25th of 2023.
April 25th of 23?
That's correct.
Did you know that was after we started this
Objection,
trial?
Your Honor, improper.
Excuse me. Watch from sidewalk.
Sir, did you know that when you received the blood stain on the headliner, that was after this trial started?
I did not know.
But you started that in April 25th of 23? Just 2 months ago?
The headliner was, that was prior.
Oh, I'm sorry. The item that you received on April of 23 was what?
Those were the contact swab, non-blood area of rear driver's seat, the blood swab of smear from rear of driver's seat, and the contact swab of front driver side door handle interior.
Okay. And you did not know that was after this trial started, correct?
I did not know.
And none of that came back to the DNA of this young man, Jamel, correct?
Correct. It was deemed uninterpretable, as well as one of the items I did not attempt to generate a DNA profile because there was insufficient amount of DNA.
Do you know what the delay was in sending that evidence to you?
Objection, outside the scope, speculation.
And did you receive any other items in 2023?
Yes, one last item, item 43.
And that was the door handle of the rear door? Is that correct?
Correct. Yes.
And did I hear you correctly that you first ran a test and it did not come back matching or belonging to or contributor to Jamel?
That's right.
And did I also hear you correctly, then you discussed something about your software with your supervisor?
With the technical lead, yes.
And then ran another test and had a 3-person contributor?
That's right. Yes.
And all of a sudden, it matched or it was labeled as Jamel may have been a contributor?
That's right.
What date was that, sir?
That was on June 1st, 2023.
Approximately 3 weeks ago?
That's right.
Who requested that,
Objection,
if you know?
What's the objection?
Speculation, outside the scope.
Well, as far as outside the scope, so if he knows, he can answer.
Who submitted that item to you 3 weeks ago?
It would have been Miramar, the investigators.
Miramar Police Department?
Yes, I can look at my
Feel
submission
free.
report. It was submitted by Miramar investigator. Mark Moretti.
Moretti.
Who was listed on the submission form.
And that was the only item that supposedly matched Jamel's DNA, correct?
I believe so. I can look back just to confirm it,
Please do.
but I do believe that is an accurate assessment. Yes, it was an item with the inclusionary likelihood issue.
Could you tell these folks when that DNA was placed on, supposedly, on the door handle?
No,
It could have been placed a week.
Objection, speculation.
Sustained.
How long can DNA stay on an item?
The DNA can persist on items. Again, as I mentioned, heat, light, moisture can cause it to degrade or become unusable. But if DNA is deposited on a surface, it can last weeks, months, years, if kept in a nice, cool, dry environment.
Did you know this Jeep was stored in police custody in a safe, dry area?
I do not.
May I have one other question? One other moment, excuse me. Thank you very much.
Attorney Redirect?
Yes, Your Honor. Mr. Rhodes, is it unusual to receive multiple submissions over the life of a case?
No, it's not unusual.
Does the date in which you work a particular item have any effect on the results you report on?
No, it is not.
As to the likelihood ratio on item number 43, who was included in that particular item?
For both propositions, Mr. Thomas was included for both the 2-person and 3-person contributor propositions. Under the 2-person proposition, Mr. Henry, Mr. Williams, and Mr. Dimmons were excluded. Under the 3-person proposition, Mr. Thomas, Mr. Williams, and Mr. Dimmons were included.
And with regards to the time of collection of that swab, Would that be indicated on the box that it is found in?
Sometimes there are indications on the collection. I can look at the market receipt. They may, I'm not sure if it's a newer one or an older one, but I can look at the market receipt if you'd like.
Okay, and that would be item number 67, what's been put into evidence as states 33. Latest or not?
Yeah, thanks.
And so item 33 in evidence, is that item number 67 and you're labeling here?
Yes, that's right.
What was the date and time of collection according to that specific item?
So it's dated at 10/26 of 2018,
And the time?
1736.
Okay. If DNA is stored in an optical environment, will it persist forever?
I'm not sure about forever, but it will persist for decades.
And in terms of it, if it is collected on a cotton swab that is dry and sterile, is that a ideal place to perpetuate DNA storage?
Yes.
Nothing further.
I have one or two questions based on that, if the court will allow me.
Sure, go ahead, sir.
You indicated it's not unusual to get multiple submissions of evidence.
That's right.
Do you know why it took 5 years to submit that exhibit to you to analyze?
Objection, Your Honor, speculation.
He knows he can answer, do you know?
I do not.
Thank you.
Counsel, is there anything else to this witness?
No, Your Honor.
Is he excused?
Yes, Your Honor.
Thank you, Ms. Step Counsel, you're excused. Ladies and gentlemen, my understanding is that's all the witnesses we have for today, and so we'll see everybody back tomorrow at 9 a.m. Remember the admonition, do not discuss the case, don't form any opinion about the case, don't allow anyone to discuss the case in the presence of certain research, just leave your notepads on your chairs. Thank you, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you. Thank you, sir. You're excused. Anything to discuss, counsel?
Yes, Your Honor. We'd like to do a sidebar. My computer screwed up.
Sidebar?
Yes.
And the jury got it.
Are you? Because of the cameras, I think it would be prudent.
That's fine. No, sidebar.
Thank you.
So cross-examination continuing in the Jamel Demons case. It is the DNA expert Kurt Rhodes, and I'm telling you, I'm here with Rich Schoenstein, Anna Yum. In the first 2 minutes of the cross-examination, Anna, I really felt like I learned more than throughout the entire direct examination of this witness. The key points, all of these things he tested were not connected to Melly, and the testing was done 2 to 3 years after he was arrested. Give me your take on that.
Absolutely. Talk about starting off cross-examination with a bang. I mean, there was a big contrast in terms of what the jury saw on direct examination versus what the jury saw on cross-examination. And keep in mind, we've only seen, like you said, a couple of minutes, and already he's starting out with the strongest points, which were everything he talked about, all those items that you talked about, item 26, 27, what have you. Well, it's not connected to my client. And the fact that there was that long duration of a 3-year period before it was tested, these are very wise and very strong points that he's making from the beginning. They always say primacy and recency when it comes to cross-examination. And he is starting off with a bang, and he's starting off strong.
So I'm going to ask you this last question. I know I've got to kick you loose here. At this point in the prosecution's case, you're the prosecutor now. Are you feeling good about your case?
At this point, I'm thinking to myself, maybe there are certain questions I should have asked on direct examination that could have brought the jury back. Again, I'm sure the prosecutor is seasoned. I'm sure the prosecutor knows her case like the back of her hand, and she probably knows that these were weak points for the prosecution. And so it's going to be interesting to see how she ends up doing her redirect examination once the defense attorney is done with cross-examination. I'm sure she's thought of these issues, and it's just a matter of time to see how she's going to address them and how she's going to rehabilitate the witness when it's her turn.
Yeah, and sometimes you know what the weaknesses are, and you get it out there, you deal with it, and you move on as quickly as you can. But certainly the cross is pointing out what appear to be some of those weaknesses. Okay, I'm going to thank and excuse you, Anna Yum. Thank you so much for being here. You were definitely most courteous, so you get to go first. We'll see you next time here on the network. Rich is going to stick around, keep working on that manifesto, Rich. We're going to go back into the courtroom now for more of that cross-examination.
Sir, did you know that when you received the blood stain on the headliner, that was after this trial started?
I did not know.
But you started that in April 25th of 23, just 2 months ago?
The headliner was, that was prior.
Oh, I'm sorry. The item that you received on April of 23 was what?
Those were the contact swab, non-blood area, rear driver seat, the blood swab of smear from rear of driver seat, and the contact swab of front of driver side door handle interior.
Okay. And you did not know that was after this trial started, correct?
I did not know.
And none of that came back to the DNA of this young man, Jamel, correct?
Correct. It was deemed uninterpretable, as well as one of the items I did not attempt to generate a DNA profile because there was insufficient amount of DNA.
Do you know what the delay was in sending that evidence to you?
Objection, outside the scope, speculation.
And did you receive any other items in 2023?
Yes, one last item, item 43.
And that was the door handle of the rear door? Is that correct?
Correct, yes.
And did I hear you correctly that you first ran a test and it did not come back matching or belonging to our contributor to Jamel?
That's correct.
And did I also hear you correctly then you discussed something about your software with your supervisor?
With the technical leader, yes.
And then ran another test and had a 3-person contributor?
That's correct, yes.
And all of a sudden it matched or it was labeled as Jamel may have been a contributor?
That's correct.
What date was that, sir?
That was on June 1st, 2023.
Approximately 3 weeks ago?
That's correct.
Who requested that,
Objection,
if you know?
What suggestion?
speculation, outside the scope.
Well, as far as outside the scope, so if he knows, he can answer.
Who submitted that item to you 3 weeks ago?
It would have been Miramar, the investigators.
Miramar Police Department?
Yes, I can look at my
Feel
submission
free.
report. It was submitted by a Miramar investigator. Mark Moretti.
Moretti.
Who is listed on the submission form.
And that was the only item that supposedly matched Jamel's DNA, correct?
I believe so. I can look back just to confirm it.
Please do.
But I do believe that is an accurate assessment. Yes, it was an item with the inclusionary likelihood issue.
Could you tell these folks when that DNA was placed on, supposedly, on the door handle?
No.
It could have been placed a week.
Objection, speculation.
Sustained.
How long can DNA stay on an item?
The DNA can persist on items. Again, as I mentioned, heat, light, moisture can cause it to degrade or become unusable. But if DNA is involved.
Adjourned till tomorrow. When can I expect these?
They are digital. I think they'd probably take until at least Monday. Because if you want them in hard copy, they are, I think I'm conservative in saying, 400 pages.
Thank
Now, so it's clear, it's not 400 pages like a deposition transcript. It is 400 pages, and it's going to be more like look like a cell phone. And there might be 5 or 6 messages per page. So while it sounds very voluminous in number, it's not as bad as 400 pages would sound normally.
And this is what you share with defense counsel.
Yes, they have the copies as well.
Thank you.
Digital.
Thank you.
We're adjourned.
The new Motorola Razr Plus.
Let me show you something, it's a good life, it's a good vibe, it's a good time, yeah, we live it up. Let me show you something, yeah, I said what I said, cause we just getting started, yeah, let me show you something. Hello, Moto.
Would that be indicated on the box that it is found in?
Sometimes there are indications on the collection. I can look at the marker receipt. It may, I'm not sure if it's a newer one or an older one, but I can look at the marker receipt if you'd like.
Okay, and that would be item number 67, what's been put into evidence as dates 33. Latest or not?
Yeah, thank you.
And so item 33 in evidence, is that item number 67 and you're labeling here?
Yes, that's right.
What was the date and time of collection according to that specific item?
So it's dated at 10/26 of 2018,
And the time?
1736.
Okay. If DNA is stored in an optical environment, will it persist forever?
I'm not sure about forever, but it will persist for decades.
And in terms of if it is collected on a cotton swab that is dry and sterile, is that a ideal place to perpetuate DNA storage?
Yes.
Nothing further.
I have one or two questions based on that, if the court will allow me.
Sure, go ahead, sir.
You indicated it's not unusual to get multiple submissions of evidence.
Yes, sir.
Do you know why it took 5 years to submit that exhibit to you to analyze?
Objection, Your Honor, speculation.
He knows he can answer, do you know?
I do not.
Thank you.
Counsel, is there any else to this witness?
No, Your Honor.
Is he excused?
Yes, Your Honor.
Thank you, Ms. Step Counsel, you're excused. Ladies and gentlemen, my understanding is that's all the witnesses we have for today.
Sometimes it's really just the question you need to get out there in front of the jury. Do you know why it took X number of years for you to get this material? Objection, it's speculation. Yeah, the witness probably doesn't know, but now the jury's asking that same question. Rich Schoenstein is here. He's been just writing notes copiously. I didn't even know what that word meant until I saw him doing this. So, first of all, my first thought, Rich, is redirect was helpful maybe in dealing with some of the delay in getting the materials, but I want to get your thoughts on that and other things. But let me squeeze in a break here first, because I know once you get started, it's very difficult to stop you. So take a break, and we'll come right back.
No! Either I'm washing clothes, so I gotta switch out the loads. I gotta put the clothes in the dryer, put another load in the washer, and I gotta go make sure the bathroom's straight. I gotta go scope the house and make sure ain't none of your clothes around this motherfucker. Make up the bed, make sure Jackson has been in the bed. Examine the bed, make sure the bed don't smell like Jack's or butt. Anyway. Then I scroll a little bit, get on live. I get on the computers, check the emails, see if I gotta take a test or do another job application. Then I'm gonna talk to Mom or Gigi or Ari or Dustin or Mimi. Doing shit so you come home. And then that's when my sleep wanna come back around. Come back home. What?
I'm tired of working.
I just kill your mood?
No.
You want me to stop talking?
No.
What's this coming off like?
I'm fucking high. Damn.